Welcome back to my channel. I'm Traben. These are my tomes, and this week's reads were full of monsters and mayhem. Before we jump into this week's reads, let me know in the comments below what is your favorite classic Universal movie monster, or just your favorite monster in general. I'm partial to Dracula. There's something about the abject nature of a vampire that's really appealing to me, and this attraction and repulsion that we feel simultaneously towards them. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the video where I'll talk about plans for next week's reads. Let's go ahead and get into what I read this week. Starting with my one book read for this week, which was The Red Winter by Cameron Sullivan. This was a rather lengthy read, but I did enjoy every moment of it and was pleasantly surprised to see that it wasn't a standalone, because it did feel like it wrapped up very nicely in the end. However, it looks as though the author has more of these stories in mind, which is great. It really feels like a Dresden Files kind of story where you have the plot wrapped up in this book in particular, and then there is space for future installments to explore some of the ongoing plots that were set up in this book. This is the story of Sebastian Graves, who is going around and trying to stop this monster from terrorizing this village. It takes place in 3 separate timelines. We have events happening in the 1400s, in the 1760s, and I believe the 1780s, maybe the 1790s. A 20-year gap between the middle and end points, and then like a 300-year gap between that and the start of the story. One of the things I really did appreciate about this book was how cohesive the world building felt. Sullivan has a command over not only their prose, but also the mechanics of the world that they've created that feels very organic and lived in and consistent in a way that other stories haven't always been. There's also romance of a kind in this book, but I don't know if I would label this as romantasy, as that relationship is ultimately very tragic. And I don't feel like that's a spoiler. The characters talk quite frequently about the impossibility of Sebastian, given the nature of his life, to form meaningful relationships with regular people. I also appreciated that this book kept an air of mystery over a lot of the workings of the world and Sebastian himself. It's nice to read a book that doesn't give you all the answers outright. And again, it makes an intriguing hook into the next installment. This book never felt like it was dragging. Everything felt very precisely crafted and well paced, and trying to figure out the culmination of all 3 arcs was very satisfying. The only criticism I could really levy against it as far as the plotting goes is that the last section seems like kind of an afterthought, given how much it builds up to what happens in this particular inn throughout the entirety of the story. And once you get the answers to that question, the rest of the book is really just a denouement for the larger story and a little bit of setup as to what might come later. All in all, I felt like this was a stronger Kill the Beast. It has a lot of similar ideas, although at its core, this is a much darker and some might argue nihilistic outlook. I would say its handling of those concepts is more realistic as a result. If you're a fan of The Witcher, if you read Kill the Beast and wanted something with a little bit more bite to it, pun not intended, then I think you'd do well to pick up The Red Winter. I really did enjoy this one, gave it 5 stars. One of the strongest fantasy reads I've had this year. Moving on to graphic novels and manga, I read Universal Monsters Invisible Man, which was penned by James Tynion. I didn't know that at the time that I picked it up. This was a gift. I believe Tynion also did the Dracula story within this line of comics. This is an excellent condensation of the Invisible Man story. It is not in any way a modernization. It does firmly set this within like the 1940s, I want to say, and it uses text boxes as a stand-in for lengthy voiceover, which you would maybe expect to see in more classic cinema. I felt those choices really did aid in the effect of the book, and this was probably the Universal Monsters comic that I've had the most fun reading. I still feel like these titles are a little bit on the short side. Like, it is a good primer or a good teaser into something that could maybe be a little bit lengthier. But I have felt that across the board, the Universal Monsters titles being only 4 issues long has been a detriment to the storytelling. Like, even as a limited series, this is very short and gives you the feeling of almost an unfinished movie, like a teaser almost. Not to say that it doesn't tell a complete story, but it does feel like it has to rush through a good number of points. That being said, the art is still fantastic. The story here is great, and it really did give me the feeling of the classic Universal Monsters movies, and for that reason, it got 4 out of 5, the strongest of the Universal Monsters that I've looked at so far. I also read Tatsuki Fujimoto's Before Chainsaw Man 22 through 26, so this would be the things that he wrote between 2022 and 2026, which I believe is after he wrote Look Back and Goodbye Eri. I felt like the titles in this particular anthology were a little bit stronger than the first set that we got. However, my caveats for that first volume still apply to this one as well. Any anthology is going to be hit or miss with the storytelling. For this title specifically, I felt there were 2 fairly strong entries. One that was so-so, a little bit strange, and one that I did not understand the tone that we were trying to go for with the title, and it did not work for me at all. If you are a fan of Chainsaw Man, I feel like this is more in line with the tone Fujimoto has kind of settled on for that title, trying to push the envelope a little bit and trying to use humor and also maybe a little bit of violence. In particular, I would say Nayuta the Prophecy is closest to Chainsaw Man. I even think he reused the character design for Nayuta in the later half of Chainsaw Man. But again, that's something that ties it more closely with that title than anything that was in Volume 1. One other thing I want to mention about this title is that it seems like Fujimoto writes a lot of his work based on Jump SQ calling him out on something and him trying to prove them wrong, which seems very high school, honestly. The brief afterwards are still interesting to give some insight into Fujimoto's process, but again, because 2 of the 4 of these were Jump SQ said I couldn't do something, so I'm going to show them. That wasn't as interesting as the first volume. If you're a fan of Chainsaw Man, you've already read through Look Back, you've already read Goodbye Eri, pick this up. If you're more into the goings on behind the scenes, I think the first volume is a much better look at a developing artist, and also I felt like the afterwards there were more insightful than what we got in this volume. Also, shout out to these covers because they managed to do compositions for 2 completely different stories that actually look like these should go together, when in actuality the stories that are being depicted here are nothing alike. Finally, this week I read Bug Ego, which was a manga. I'm going to be honest here and say that I don't have any idea what this comic is about, and I've read it. So it has something to do with learning hacks in the world, and sometimes you can do hacks that are not just like things to make life easier, but are actually changing the way the world works, but you can't write them down or copy them or tell them to anyone. And if you do, bad things start happening. And oh boy, do bad things start happening when these 2 guys start to use these hacks. It's bizarre. Every chapter feels like a complete non sequitur to what happened before. I'm not sure if we're building up to anything. I'm not sure if there's a greater point here. But It was weird, it was wild, and if you're into that, like, you should check it out. It is one of the most bizarre comics I've read this year for sure. It just has not shown that cohesion to me, and I'm not sure if that's just because this is a first volume, and so like many first volumes, you're unclear of exactly how it's going to be developing, and it comes as you go further and further in, or if it's because the author is intentionally trying to make something that is indecipherable and impossible to predict what the next move is going to be. I have no idea. I'm going to pick up the next volume. It was interesting. It was just really, really weird. This is by One, by the way, who is the author of One Punch Man. So if you are into the ridiculous sensibilities of like a One Punch Man or Mob Psycho 100, it definitely feels like he has a style. This is very different from either one of those titles. I gave it 3 stars because I don't know what's happening, but I want to read the next one. So like a 3-star, but like maybe it could end up being really great, or maybe it could end up being really terrible. Jury's still out. We'll pick up the next one. I'll let you know. And that's my reads for this week. Thanks for hanging out while I talk about monsters and mutants and mayhem and just general craziness. Next week should be far less manic. I don't try to create themed weeks, but I am trying to get as many things off my cart before Summerween. And so I was looking and found a couple of things that I wanted to get through, and they all have to do with like corporate owned entities. So we have a Miss Marvel book that I would like to read. We have 2 Magic the Gathering books that I need to get off the shelf that I've had this one for a very long time. This one, much shorter time, but I am wanting to get all of these. I think they'll all be quick reads, which is another reason why I'm picking them up this week. And I am very much looking forward to reading the 2 Magic the Gathering books back to back, because I've heard negative things about one of them and positive things about the other. So I want to see how they juxtapose, how they compare side by side to one another. But that's going to do it for this week. As always, I hope your reading journey is going well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so we can grow this corner of our booktube community. And until the next one, take care.